Hello, welcome to the Great Rabbino. We got an interview today with Joel Gertner from ECW fame. I'm a huge wrestling fan, so this is awesome. Joel, how you doing?
I am doing well.
I love it.
Thank you for asking.
I'm in one of my Jewish wrestlers shirts, Chris
Nice.
Masters, who did one of our shows. I want to just start off. How'd you get your start in wrestling? I don't know that a lot of people know that. How did you get your start in wrestling?
Yeah, I loved watching it as a kid. There were things you could see, and even more so, things you could hear on professional wrestling on TV that you wouldn't be hearing anywhere else on TV. This was even before kind of Shock Jock and Crash TV, before Jerry Springer, before Morton Downey. This is going back to the earlier to mid 80s. And at that point in time, the 80s were, in their own way, very wild times. But yet, when it came to what you could see on TV as a kid, expanding your vocabulary, expanding your knowledge of life and the world, and trying to take on new ideas and philosophies, everything was just very cookie cutter and very formulaic. And compared to today, so was wrestling. But wrestling stepped outside of a comfort zone that I think all else of TV was stuck inside of. So I gravitated towards it. And when I was old enough, around the time of my 16th birthday, I had been reading in a newsletter that I got about a wrestling gym, a wrestling school that was not very far away from me. I was in Brooklyn. The school was in Manhattan. And I went there and gave it a try. And I knew I wasn't going to be a wrestler per se. I knew that between the ropes was not my bread and butter. But I gave it one or two classes just to do stuff like run the ropes and take back bumps, which came in handy later as a manager, being able to protect myself. And yeah, that's basically the whole story. I've been pretty much in it for later this year will be 30 years active.
That's awesome. So people most know you from your time in ECW. And I'd love to know how you got started. It'd be really kind of cool if the story, I don't know if this is where it goes, but like Paul Heyman, one of the most recognizable Jews ever to be in pro wrestling, certainly. How did ECW come about and in your tenure there?
Yeah, I had been following ECW mostly through newsletters, maybe seeing some videotape footage, not really being able to see the TV every week episodically. That changed a little bit when I went up to Ithaca, New York for college. I went to Cornell, and there was a sports bar in town there that got, at the time, the right channel, whether it was probably Sports Channel Philly, because we were probably not on MSG at the moment. So it was being able to see some of the Sports Channel Philly stuff. But around the time of me getting in, around 95, started being able to watch it more. And eventually just around August, September, just was at the ECW arena for a show. Went to hang out with some friends in the business and meet some people and network at a hotel that everybody went to hang out and have drinks at after the show. And there I ran into Paul Heyman in the lobby of the hotel. And I saw that he, I think, had just pressed the button and was waiting to go upstairs. And I said, ask. If you don't ask, it's no anyway. It's not a yes until you ask and get a yes. And I've always kind of been of the mindset, I'd rather regret something that I did than regret not doing something and have to look back in mystery. So I kind of approached him and said, hey, Paul, I've been an admirer of your work for years. I've called into many radio shows that you've been on. I've watched you, from a distance, and I've learned from you. I work in the business myself. We have a mutual friend named so-and-so. A lot of the work I do on the independents is ring announcing and the like. And you have a show coming up in Middletown, New York. I know that your ring announcing crew, your ring announcer, your timekeeper, they are Philadelphia based. Not sure if you're using the regular folks that you do, or if you'd be outsourcing and using new people. If that's the case, and if you wouldn't mind me auditioning, I'd love to, I'd love to be the one if it's not taking anything away from anybody else. And he kind of looked at me and he was like, you want it? And I was like, yeah. He's like, you got it. Be there by 5. And that was it. And be there by 5 turned into over 5 years.
So I want to talk a little bit about the legends there, because outside of Paul Heyman, I feel like there's this like debate that swirls around, which is a good debate, like a healthy debate. Like, who is the guy that when you look back at ECW, obviously I think Paul Heyman is the clear one, and I don't think any, but I think it was in the DVD they made for WWE where they talk about like, look at the impact ECW. You have the Dudley Boys, and both of them had their own single runs. RVD, Tommy Dreamer, Raven. You have all these, even the catalyst to some of the Mankind stuff, and certainly Stone Cold, the precursor to Stone Cold Steve Austin. So you have when you go back and you look at it, who is the guy who's on that Mount Rushmore of ECW legends?
The Mount Rushmore has to include, I've got a podcast that I do with the Blue Meanie and with Josh Chernoff called That Was Extreme. And once monthly, we look back. And the first 2 shows that we did were about events. But our third show, the most recent one for March, was the first one about an individual. And we just did the show about Taz that dropped a couple of weeks ago. I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't include him, because he's been babyface, heel, tweener. He's been the Tasmaniac. He's been Taz. He's been the Human Suplex Machine, Path of Rage. He's been with Sabu. He's been with Kevin Sullivan. He's been on his own. He's been with Fonzie. He's been not with Fonzie. He's been there as an independent guy in his first couple of efforts, just trying to get a break and join Eastern Championship Wrestling. And he's come back as a WWF Royal Rumble appearing wrestler to take the title off of Mike Awesome. So he, honestly, if you don't include Taz, then it's not Mount Rushmore. He would be towards the center of the Mount Rushmore. And you have to include Sabu. You have to include Tommy Dreamer. I would include Sandman and Raven. I would include Cactus Jack and Terry Funk. I would then include RVD, because now all of a sudden you feel remiss for not having him. So I think the Mount Rushmore would have to have more like at least maybe 8 faces than 4, but I think that would be a good start.
Yeah, that moment, I remember specifically when I saw that Taz went back to beat Mike Awesome. I looked at my father, who's also a wrestling fan, but not quite as big as I, and I said, you got to start watching. That was insane, because like it broke what we thought about wrestling. That moment, because when I saw ECW, to me it was just like an alternative sort of extreme. When I was watching ECW, I was very into like the Rob Van Dam, but then then I saw sort of that collaboration in that moment, where it wasn't on WWE TV, so like it wasn't like Vince trying to get something. I mean, obviously he did, certainly long term, but that moment I was like, this is mainstream now. Like, you can't deny it. He just moved, he's on multiple networks. So and even in Hollywood, you couldn't be on multiple networks. So that was so crazy to me. That might have been the moment that really sort of flipped me into like a big ECW fan. Yeah. What were sort of those final days like? I think recently I just saw a clip of the last sort of celebration in a ring. They were doing something on Tommy Dreamer, and he was talking about it. What were those last days like? And were you still there for them? And what was the sense in the locker room? Did people think like they were going to get hired elsewhere, or what was that feeling like?
I was under contract on paper until sometime between the January pay-per-view from the Sydney and the March date, where everything was officially all wrapped up and where Paul debuted as an announcer heading into WrestleMania. So maybe sometime around February, I was on the books until The Arkansas stuff, the in-ring celebrations and stuff, the last couple of house shows were house shows. They weren't for TV, so I wasn't flown out for them. So my last live appearance was the Guilty as Charged show, the January show. But I was there until the end, and didn't want to leave, and had at least one opportunity to leave in my 5 years there that I guess somewhat I listened to. I don't know that entertain it would be the right word, but there was an opportunity there. If I absolutely had wanted to leave for sure, there's the likelihood, at least, that I could have. But I stayed from September '95 to the end. Wasn't at the Arkansas shows, so can't recount the emotion that was in the ring at our final show. But I felt some of it at the last pay-per-view. I got teary-eyed in the locker room upstairs at that Manhattan Center. And I was starting to manage Christian York and Joey Matthews at the time as kind of like a baby face tag team. I didn't know where it was going to wind up going. Was I going to turn on them? Were they going to turn on me? It got about as far as having like a Jim Cornette dynamic dudes vibe. And then that was all there was to it for time. But I remember being a little bit down and kind of teary eyed and kind of shaking my head. And Christian York and Joey Matthews came up to me and they were like, "Bro, that's not you. You're not, you look down. Like, what's up?" And I remember I shook my head and I told them, I was like, because they had just started. And I said, if you guys had shown up and started here 3 years earlier, I don't even think I finished the thought. I think that's exactly what I said. If you guys had started here 3 years earlier, and that was a very surreal moment for the three of us, kind of just looking at each other and maybe having a moment of thought of, maybe they'd be the top tag team in the company, maybe they'd already be in WWF, maybe, who knows. But there was a lot of emotion at the end, as you'd expect, because for a substantial number of people, this was at the time and would go on to still be the highlight of their career, the peak of their professional life. And I think some people were aware of it. Some people were anxious about it or afraid of it. And it was because it was abrupt and because it wasn't natural and because it didn't feel like anything we even did that we could blame ourselves for. It didn't feel like there was completion or closure, It didn't feel like graduating from middle school, now you go to high school, some of your friends will be there, some won't. It didn't feel like going off to college and living in the dorm. It didn't have that same sense of organic kind of coming to be.
Yeah. I was recently just listening to a podcast with Paul Heyman. I think it was either Stone Cold or something like that, where he talked about how close they were. And without the TV deal, they couldn't do this. And without there was a lawsuit, and with the lawsuit, it was like so close to continuing, but there were just moments that couldn't. And but I think what it really did, I think obviously created huge stars and another avenue, but it seems like it also taught people about the business for a lot of them. We've talked about some of them, but the RVDs and the Bully Rays and the Devon, how influential they've been to younger stars, and the business side of this. I mean, I think probably having Taz backstage at AEW is very helpful because he did the marketing and all those things that he's just another fresh eyes to have on that. Let's talk about your Jewish life a little bit. Did you grow up? I knew you grew up in Brooklyn, so there were Jews around you for sure. Were you raised religious at all? Active? Are you still active at all? Do you need a bar mitzvah and a rabbi? Can I help you out in that way? What was that like?
We celebrated high holidays. My grandfather took me right before Passover began, right one year, first night Seder, and I mean right before, like maybe 5:30 in the afternoon. So I guess I was asking, but it was absolutely not something that would happen. This was the only year it happened, maybe because everybody found out. But at about 5:30 in the afternoon, heading into Passover Seder, he took me to, I think, Wendy's for like a big like bacon double cheeseburger, because that bun was going to be the last bread I was going to have for a week. We went to shul for high holidays mostly, maybe only for high holidays. And I think there my parents got dissuaded because of a speech that was given in shul where it was, I don't know if it was this stiff, but it was along the lines of, if you only come to shul on the high holidays, you're not a real Jew. And my parents come from Europe, from European Jewry, like directly. I'm first generation. So their parents went through Holocaust era Europe. And I don't think it landed right, them being told that they weren't true Jews. So so we stopped going to shul. I had a bar mitzvah. It was a wrestling themed bar mitzvah.
Your pictures?
And yeah, I got a ton of pictures. I'll try to send you one. And what else, man? When I was at Cornell one time, I said, you know what, why not? And there was a Reformed synagogue, and I went and sat and listened there. And that was the shul that we had gone to when we went on the high holidays was a bit more conservative. And this was Reformed. And so it was the first time I heard stuff like God being referred to alternately as he and she. And it was for me an interesting experience. And Jewish life beyond that, culturally, you know, I lived with my grandmother for a few years, stayed with her, and she spoke Yiddish pretty much as her primary language, even though she was from Latvia. So she had Latvian or Latonish to fall back on, and also spoke Russian, because when my mom was born in Latvia, it was part of the Soviet Union. So and she had lived in Israel for a few years in between, right before coming to America. So she spoke Latvian, Russian, Hebrew, but her language of choice was Yiddish. So I understood all of the Yiddish she spoke and could speak some of it back. When I went to college for the second time, because I left to embark on ECW, so I left Cornell without graduating. So when I went back to Brooklyn College, I was living with my grandmother at the time in Brooklyn. One of the courses that I decided to take, as much for me as it would be for her, so that we could share it, was Yiddish. I took Yiddish 101, I think they called it. And they gave us like a textbook that had like songs and a whole bunch of other stuff. And she would enjoy reading the textbook, I think, even more than I would. But culturally, when it comes to stuff like, you know, speaking Yiddish or like food or that kind of thing, you know, I wouldn't say a very Jewish life. I don't even know if I would say a Jewish life, because I don't know that I can, you know, hold the torch and carry the candle. But certainly it was there, and certainly always in my heart.
You know, it's amazing when a few years ago, Paul Heyman said Kaddish, I think for The Undertaker, in the middle of the ring with Lesnar. And man, were people like, are you watching something? I watch all of it. Yes. You know, but like, it was so, it's become so, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, a lot of Judaism in wrestling has become so normal because of the name Goldberg, because of Paul Heyman, because of MJF.
A little Kaddish, by the way, is only fair after going back to the 80s or early 90s with him doing Dominus, Dominus. You know, he's done so much kind of Roman Catholic Latin that a little bit of Kaddish is only suitable.
Fair enough. So what are you up to these days, and how much are you involved still in the wrestling scene?
Gosh, with the pandemic and not really doing as much walking, I used to do about 8 or 9 miles of walking a day. Now I don't find as much reason to do that. So with the pandemic, what am I up to? I'd say I'm up to about 281. Yeah, doing some wrestling, man, some ring announcing, some internet pay-per-view color commentary, some managing, whatever is needed. Same as always, just less of it, unfortunately, with the pandemic. Doing a lot of cameos, doing a lot of virtual auctions and signings. And then outside of wrestling, doing stuff that doesn't feel like work, trading stock, working an election here or there. More regular than that, I'm a math tutor and a substitute teacher in the New York City public school system. Credit card processing. Gosh, what am I forgetting? Background acting. I've got appearances on Ray Donovan and a few other shows. Yeah, I'm probably forgetting something, but I'll do it as long as it pays and it doesn't feel like work.
That's great. So you're keeping busy, and hopefully everyone over there is healthy. I appreciate your time. Hopefully our paths will cross. A few of us are thinking about a Jewish WrestleMania, but we won't call it WrestleMania, but at some point. So we'd love to have everyone a part of it, and certainly you would be certainly in there. And you're in New York?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and whenever you do your Wrestle Mitzvah, I'm happy to be there. I love it.
All right, love it. All right, Joe, I appreciate the time, and I'm sure our fans will love this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Reb. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.